Thank you, Kelly. So, yes, I used to work for Public Campaign, which fought to pass full public financing, or we called it clean elections, now we call it fair elections initiatives. We actually got them through in Maine, Massachusetts, and Arizona, and some aspects of the law that's being pushed through for New York State are rooted in the work that was done then. Along the way, I, with a co-author, wrote a book called Is That a Politician in Your Pocket?, which was sort of a guide to all the ways that money in politics in Washington affects you at the pocketbook level. I thought just because we've been sitting for a little bit, we just start with a simple exercise to illustrate the problem of big money in politics. So I actually want to start out by asking everybody just to stand for 1 second. Now let's imagine that this room, these 100 people in the room, you all represent the 20 million residents of New York State. So let's talk about who really matters in politics in New York. So for starters, this part of the room, just sit down. No, actually, even here, sit here, stay standing. It's like 40% of the electorate in New York votes. Okay, the 60% who don't vote, sorry, you don't matter at all.
Right.
Now, the people who vote, you think you're the ones who really matter, right? Well, I want everybody to sit down except for you. Mary Kay, you stay standing, okay? And she is, actually, you know what? Sit down, but just put both hands up, because you're only half of 1% of all New Yorkers make campaign contributions. And frankly, you should probably just put up your pinky, okay? Because if we're going to talk about the people who give the largest sums, it's a very small number, okay? It's a few thousand people who are and corporations, I should add, who are providing the bulk of money that go into elections in New York State. That's the problem in a nutshell. Next slide, please. So New York is one of the worst states in the country when it comes to trying to limit the influence of big money in politics. We have extremely high campaign contribution limits. They're more than double what you're allowed to give at the federal level, double, triple, quadruple. For governor, you can give anywhere from $51,000 to $65,000 for statewide candidates. These are nonsensical limits. I mean, they almost mean nothing in practice, though it's very nice if you are a well-connected candidate and know people who can write big checks. It makes life really easy for you. You don't have to spend as much time raising money. But of the 38 states that currently have limits on campaign contributions, New York is the worst. Next slide. Now, the ways that big money dominates Albany, we can go into them in all kinds of ways. I'm not going to drill into every detail on Governor Cuomo, but he is, truly the best fundraiser in the state. He's raised more than $100 million total for his 3 campaigns for office, and the bulk of his money comes, 80%, coming from people who have given $10,000 or more to him. In the last cycle, until the New York Times embarrassed him for it, he was raising so much money from $1,000 and up donors, he literally had nobody who had made a small contribution to him. Small being defined as under $175. So then what they did is they got various friends and family of the campaign and various people working on the campaign to make small contributions, so at least statistically it would look like he actually had support from little people. That's our governor. And he's just playing by the rules, by the way. Next slide. Now, big money dominates Albany in all kinds of other ways. The single biggest interest giving money to state legislative campaigns and statewide campaigns is real estate. Is it any wonder that we can't get more money for affordable housing or better rent regulations? Then you have Wall Street. Then you have big pharma and the health insurers and on down, fossil fuel interests. If you care about issues and you're not paying attention to who is giving the money, you can use your vote all you want and you're going to be trumped by money. Next slide. In this last cycle in 2018, there was about 127 million given to state campaigns. Of that, half of it came in people giving $10,000 or more. Just 5.8 million, that's like 4% of it, came from small donors, according to an estimate done by the Brennan Center, which is a real source of expertise on this issue. more money was given by 100 big donors than all the money given by 137,000 small donors. We are near the bottom, and then when you look state by state at the role of small donors, the people who only give, 25, 50, 100, the definition in New York is 175 because that's the level at which things are reported. New York is near the bottom in terms of the importance of small donors in campaigns. And this is really the crux of the issue. Just to bring it home to two of the most important legislators, who, by the way, are both people who represent folks in NYCD 16. Andrea Stewart-Cousins, the Senate Majority Leader, she raised a little bit over $1 million for her campaign from about 1,349 donors. 363 of those gave over 1,000, and about 544, which is a decent number actually, gave under 175. Compare that to Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie, who raised about 700,000 from just 524 donors. More than half gave over 1,000. Just 11 gave 175 or less. Now, before I talk about what Governor Cuomo has to say about this, I just want to read a quote from something that former Labor Secretary Robert Reich said about what is the real influence of all this big money on the political process. Because politicians, they're all operating under the system. They all have to raise money, and they have to spend a lot of time talking to people who have the money in order to get those checks. So what does that do to the politician's mind? And he wrote, increasingly, the politician hears the same kind of suggestions, the same voicing of concerns and priorities. The wealthy do not speak in one voice, to be sure, but they share a broad common perspective in which such things as balancing the budget, opening trade routes, and cutting taxes on capital gains are of central importance. Meanwhile, the politician hears only indirectly and abstractly from the less comfortable members of society. The pollster shows him how focus groups of average working people have answered a blizzard of questions, but the less comfortable are not at the coffees and dinners with the politician. They do not play golf with him. They do not tell the politician directly and repeatedly, in casual banter or through personal stories, how they view the world. They do not speak continuously into the politician's ear about such concerns as job security, wages, child care, the cost of housing and health insurance, and mounting credit card debt. Access to the network of the wealthy does not buy a politician's mind. Instead, it nibbles constantly, sweetly at his ear. This is what big money in politics has done, and Albany is just one of the worst examples. And now we are living in a very important moment. The moment is that we have a lot of new people who got elected, and we have changed the balance of power in Albany for the moment. And that balance is going to try and go back to the status quo, because all the money, it's not like it went away. It's not like all those big interests decided that they were going to go to a different state and try and control things there. So what should we do about this? So our governor, in his last State of the State, you can see he gets it, right? The only way to truly fix this problem is to institute a public financing system for political campaigns that matches funds from small donations. The idea is, and this is the core idea of on the next slide, for what would fair elections do. The core idea is to level up. We're never going to be able, with the Supreme Court that we have, to get money out of politics. The idea is to get people in and to make the money and voice of everyday, ordinary people matter a lot more than it currently matters. And the best way to do that, we already have a great example in New York City, is small donor matching. The idea is, and all the current bills that are being mooted talk about a 6-to-1 match. The question of exactly at what level, we're not sure what they're going to come up with, but they all talk about a 6-to-1 match up to a certain amount for small contributions, which means that all the people in this room, if you gave $150, suddenly you're a $1,000 donor. You matter more, and if you're a politician thinking of running for office and you don't want to have to go to those big interests, you can spend a lot more of your time raising money from ordinary folks. A big change. Next slide, please. So Where does this now stand in the legislature? We're not sure. In every one of the past cycles, there have been fair elections bills proposed. Cuomo sponsored one, supported one in 2017. He talked about matching dollars up to $175 contributions. In the bill that Andrea Stewart-Cousins pushed in 2018, it was for up to $250. There are variations here. We're not sure exactly where the leadership bill is going to land. Now you're asking, how are you going to pay for this? And the answer is partly from a tax checkoff. So the same way that you can put money into presidential campaign public funding on your tax return, you'll have that option to put up to $5 into the fund, into a general fund for New York State. And in addition, they'll put a 10% surcharge on penalties for things like banking fraud. Total estimated cost, $65 million per cycle. That's about $1.50 a year for each resident of New York State. Now, how would this change how politics works in places like the Assembly and the Senate? It's a little bit hard to read this, don't worry about it. The main thing about these two slides is it shows the distribution of donations now. That's the slide on the right, and this slide on, slide on the left, slide on the right shows you what it would look like under Cuomo's proposed matching fund. And the key thing here is how much the money from small donors and people giving below $2,000 moves, how much more it comes from the smaller side of the balance. Same on the next slide, you can see for the Senate. So this is just a general picture of how we would change the balance of power in Albany in terms of who matters most in politics. Okay, and then the last thing, just to understand from the experience of New York City, because people in New York City who are running for city council run with a matching fund system now, but if they're running for things like Assembly, they don't. Academics have been able to look very closely at what's the difference in New York City when you have matching funds or if you don't have matching funds. And it turns out when you have a matching fund system, you get people, the people who give are far more likely to be poorer, of color, geographically dispersed. More neighborhoods, in effect, have representation in the money primary, which is the thing that really matters most in terms of what people then run. Okay, so getting to conclusions here. Now what? In the last few years, we've had all of the Democratic leaders from Governor Cuomo, now Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, and the Assembly Speaker Paul Heastie not only have been on the record supporting a matching fair elections public financing system, they've even at different times been the lead sponsors of bills. And this is, I would say, the $127 million question. What are they going to do now? Because they don't have a free vote anymore. This time, these votes count. In all the past cycles, they knew if they, passed it in the Assembly that the Senate would kill it. So far, what we know is that Governor Cuomo included it in his State of the State address, which is good. And the word is that he is supposedly going to put it into his budget proposal. And as everybody knows from Shelley's great presentation that we had a couple of meetings ago, the budget proposal is really where a lot of policy decisions happen, as opposed to through the normal legislative process. That's New York. And so we're watching very closely to see what will be in that budget proposal. But the fact is that there is a lot that we, this group, can do because, as folks saw from our last meeting, there are a number of Assembly members who all represent folks from our district, as well as the state senators, as well as our governor. And they're all going to need to hear from us. There is a big coalition called Fair Elections New York. If you go to fairelectionsny.org, you can sign up there, or you can come to our table, join the Voting and Campaign Finance Reform Working Committee, and we're going to be working on this. And I have to say, if all the other issues, everybody here works on the issues they're most passionate about. I've always been passionate about this one, because I think it is the key that unlocks all the other ones. And it's not that you have to let go of those other issues. In fact, if we only talk about money and politics in the abstract, we're going to lose. And the politicians, by the way, The good ones as well as the bad ones. They're all real experts on this issue because they all had to run. And they all had to raise money. And so they'll give you the reasons why this particular proposal isn't going to work, it's too complicated or whatever, and the next thing you know, we're back to losing. The system does not want to give in on this. This is about power and whose voice matters. So if you want to make sure that we use this once-in-a-lifetime chance in New York to change the balance of power permanently, you really ought to make fair elections a priority. So thank you. I don't know.